I recently found myself talking about diagnosis and the diagnosis process with someone, kind of trying to give them some insights into what the process might be like and what it what can make hard, what can be helpful. And I had written out most of it. It was an email exchange, and then it occurred to me that that might be something that was helpful for a lot of people to hear. So I had a really kind of a non-unique experience for women of my age. Um, I was late diagnosed, but it was in college. And I went through a whole range of feelings. So I'm just going to start in on kind of what I summarized. So the first thing is, guys, having a diagnosis, a neurodiversity diagnosis, a learning disability. I hate the word disability. It's different ability, but that's, for better or worse, what that typically is. It doesn't really change a person. It's really just looking at who you are and trying to put some approximate labels on that. And those labels are not 100% accurate, right? I mean, we're all different people. If you meet one person, you've met one person, and any other person you meet, no matter who they are, they're going to look a little bit different. And that's normal, right? That is true for everybody, and that's true for everybody who is neurodiverse as well. It doesn't change you at all. One of the examples that I think on the other direction is that a lot of times people find out that I have a PhD. I have a PhD in chemical and biomolecular engineering. And even if it's people that I've known for several years, sometimes I have this experience where I say, something, and when I was doing my PhD, yada, yada, yada. And they'll go, "You have a PhD?" And this is when I know it's going to go uncomfortable, because then they go, "Wow, so you're really smart." And I'm like, I'm the same person that you've known for however long you've known me. This doesn't change anything. I haven't changed. Your perception of me has changed, but I haven't changed. I'm still the same person that I always have been. I'm just as accessible. I'm just as funny. I'm just as goofy. I'm just as absent-minded. That happens to be one aspect of my personality, but I haven't changed. And a diagnosis for some neurodiversity thing is the same. Having that label doesn't change who you are. It just helps you understand yourself better. It helps you access accommodations legally, and it can give you an idea of where to start looking for strategies or things that might help, right? It can help you access your capabilities better, because you know then where your strengths are and you know where your weaknesses are, and you can figure out how to accommodate those. So for example, I work with dyslexic students, and for many of them, finding different ways to access content doesn't change their ability to think about it, but if they can figure out those methods and use a text-to-speech or speech-to-text or some kind of a writing program that helps, that expands their capabilities, because now they can do the thing that's hard, but their brain is still the same. So that's the first thing, is it doesn't change you. It just makes things easier. The second thing is, I think the testing is a hard thing to do, and it's really scary, and it can feel like you're going to find out you're more broken than you knew, but it doesn't change you. It just gives you insight. And so in a lot of ways, those diagnoses, it has been a lifeline for me personally, as somebody who has neurodiversity. I was diagnosed with ADHD, but it's also been a lifeline for my children as they've gotten diagnoses that have helped them understand themselves better, and it's made it more possible for us to go into the classroom and say, this is how they're going to thrive. These are the things that we need to do to help with sensory stuff. This is the kinds of things that we need to do to help with hearing and processing language. These are the things that we need to do to help with getting anxious or sitting too long. All of these things will help, and then they thrive. So I was in gifted programs, but because of that, I was also sort of left to my own devices and would go do a deep thinking project. It was a really small school. So the smart kids were me and 2 guys, And the rest of my 15-person class was not in that category or not categorized that way at that time. And so a lot of times they were like, well, you're gifted, you need specialized work, and we're going to send you off to do this thing. And I'd go off and think, and that was great, right? I could go off and I could deep dive into stuff and learn about things. But there are still some traditional skills that are completely lost to me. I still have no idea how grammar works. Like, I know it's right or wrong. I can write a paragraph. I can correct it. When I see the underline, I know that has to be fixed. But I don't understand the rules, because basically, while the rest of my peers were learning grammar in 6th to 8th grade, I was off deep diving about dolphins at the college level, which was really interesting, really fun, but also kind of awkward, because I learned a lot of really awkward information about dolphin mating behaviors that some adult should have come along, been watching what I was doing, and plucked that book right out of my hand, because that is stuff I did not need to know at that time of my life in retrospect. So I struggled at that time, but at that time in the 1980s and 1990s, early 1990s, if you didn't fail, you didn't get any support, because at that point you really couldn't be. It was like, well, if you're successful and you're getting A's and B's, then you're not having a problem. And so we don't need to fix anything. You're doing fine. So ADHD and learning disabilities and neurodiversity, that was for the dumb kids, right? And then the gifted kids were the smart kids, and you couldn't possibly be gifted but also have like neurodiversity, because how do those things relate, right? And now we've discovered actually they do coincide a lot. Like, they're two entirely different things. You can be anywhere on the neurodiversity spectrum and anywhere on the intelligence spectrum. And sometimes I think neurodiverse people are very intelligent, but we just don't see it. So we've gotten a lot more nuanced version of that now. And I think that has been very helpful, because a lot of people are diagnosed very early, which means before they ever get started, they've got accommodations and they're able to succeed and they're able to do well. So basically, what was happening for me in that small school, I was getting the perfect sort of enrichment and freedom to move around and freedom to deep dive and freedom to think about things and process information in my own way that was great for my ADHD brain. But when it came to all of the time management and whatever else that was challenging, I was really just sledgehammering my way through, because my strengths and my varied interests were enough to be able to sledgehammer, right? And I got great grades. In fact, I graduated at the top of my 15-person class, which is not really all that much of an accomplishment, but it was still pretty good. And then I was in this upper echelon when I went to high school. And so I looked on paper great, but it was at the expense of constant exhaustion. I was exhausted. I've been exhausted. I'm 47, almost 48 now, and I have been exhausted for about 35 years, maybe more. It might be more like 40 years. I've been exhausted because I've been constantly masking, constantly trying to bulldoze my way through academic programs, constantly trying to keep up without making any accommodations. And even after I got a diagnosis, I'm not sure that changed a lot, especially not right away. So I was also constantly feeling like I was right on the verge of being discovered for the complete and total idiot that I was. And now I've come to find out this is really common. There are a lot of, especially women around my age, that have tremendous imposter syndrome, because we have spent so long bulldozing our way through, making it work, and masking because how else do you do it, right? Because if you're succeeding, you can't be having a problem, and if you need support, you can't possibly be succeeding. Those two don't exist together. So rather than accommodating that and helping us all succeed, but also not be like stress monkeys, that never happened, right? So I've got still massive imposter syndrome. Now, in my freshman year of college, when I was 18 years old, I was there on a full academic ride. I graduated 13th in a class of roughly 500 from high school, and I went to a college on a full academic ride. And then I completely bombed organic chemistry. I was 6 hours from failing the class before I went and withdrew. And yeah, in case you were wondering, I was in fact there doing chemical and biomolecular engineering. Actually, at that point, I think it was just chemical engineering. So I should really have had a pretty good grasp of organic chemistry, but I was failing it. And my brute academic strength at that point and my mask, all of the stuff that had gotten me there, gotten me the full ride, gotten everybody to think I was some kind of gifted kid, finally failed to hold up under the assault on my time management and my memorization ability and my ADHD and my executive function stuff and just trying to function. On top of having gone away to college and now I was trying to function as an adult, it didn't work anymore. And at that point, I tactically withdrew from the class. I said, okay, I've got to withdraw. I can't fail. Can't lose my scholarship. And at the time, I told my TA, I'm withdrawing from the class. I'm sorry, I have a frog in my throat. It kind of looks like I'm tearing up, but that's not what's happening at all. I've just spoken too much. So I had told my TA that I was withdrawing, and my TA was like, you know what? I think you have ADHD because you're smart, you get it, but your X, Y, and Z things that you're doing don't match your skills. So something's going on. And this was some graduate student, I'm sure at the time, not that much older than me, didn't appear to be that experienced, had no business telling me anything about myself, didn't even know me that well. I'll tell you what, I was pissed. How dare he? There was nothing wrong with me. I was a straight A student. I was there on a full ride. And he had the gall to imply to me that something was wrong with me. Oh no, right? I was really mad for quite a while. And then eventually I decided that I was going to go get tested because it was a strategic move to access accommodations. If I could access accommodations, it would make things easier, right? And hey, if I could get some bonus time and support and I would pass, that was great. So a full ride at the college, I went to Northeastern University, and a full ride at the school, I think at the time was about $100,000 or $120,000. And so I was completely willing to sacrifice my rightful indignation and suck it up and go get tested. Because if I could get tested, they would allow me to have some more access. I had longer to withdraw. I was able to retake the class with no penalties. They would replace the grade, all of those things, right? So this was a strategic move on my part, and I was pretty much like, well, that's fine. This is humiliating, but I'm just going to go do this because this is what I need to do to get ahead and whatever, right? I'll do it. So I went and I saw a psychiatrist and got a diagnosis of anxiety, which is probably true at the time. And that allowed me some additional time on tests and whatnot. And in the meantime, I took the tests for ADHD, or went and had that test done. And shockingly, surprise, surprise, after I got tested, it came out that I have ADHD. And I also had what they called at the time a mild learning disability, which I guess in that test that they were using, I don't think they used the same thing, but at that time that basically meant that there was more than a 10-point difference between two different intelligence scores. It was like math and language or something like that. So they're like, oh, on top of the ADHD, you also have a mild learning, it's only 11 points difference, but that's enough that it can make things challenging because one feels much harder than the other. And so when you're trying to do the one and not the other, you run into issues, right? And so that is, even though you're not disabled in either area, both of the areas were very high and your IQ is high, everything's fine, that discrepancy constitutes a learning disability. So I was like, blown away, right? I was like, okay, whatever. I'm just going to ignore this and I'm going to take the accommodations. And so between the anxiety accommodations, like test anxiety and work anxiety and whatnot, and the ADHD accommodations, I was able to really structure my schedule. I could get notes, which helped me make sure that if I missed something in class, I could catch up on it. I was able to get more time on testing. I was able to have some small amount of like notes with me, calculators. It just really opened things up, so it made it feasible, right? I didn't have to keep track of as many things. I got a little bit of extra time if I missed a deadline. All of those things were great, right? I had this easy thing. And I would say for the first probably 15 years, I basically used that to unlock accommodations, and I pretended everything was fine. I primarily saw it as a way to game the system. I was going to game the system. I was going to succeed better because I was able to do all of these things. And I'll tell you, not a small number of people along the way were like, well, if that's a disability, please give me some, because I too would like to get A's, succeed at college, go to graduate school, get full rides, and all of those things, which I think didn't help me to really look at what it was. It was like, well, yeah, I do have a privilege, a bonus here. It felt like a privilege. And honestly, after I got to the point where I was diagnosed and I had those benefits, it felt easy. Maybe not easy. It's not easy to go to college. It's not easy to get a degree. It's not easy to go to graduate school, but it felt easier because all of a sudden my needs were being accommodated. I was getting support in the way that I needed it. And so it became feasible, manageable. I was less stressed. I was more able to get the amount of sleep that I need instead of staying up all night to cram to get even the most basic homework done, the stuff that I'd been doing in high school. And it still wasn't hard. I still pulled all-nighters. I still studied hard, but now it was manageable. And eventually I sort of realized, you know what? I'm not gaming the system. These things that are being done for me, this is putting me on level with other people who are functioning at my level, right? Now, I'm not trying to bull my way through the China shop. Now I am actually functioning at this level. I wasn't gaming the system. I was getting from the system what I needed. And that's what that diagnosis gave me. So even though I started out really pissed about it and I had a lot of angst and anxiety and irritation, it really turned out once I figured it out. And it took me time. It took me like 15 years to figure this out. And I feel like my children, their generation, it's not taking them as long to figure it out, because now we're speaking in terms of, hey, you know what? You have some strengths, you have some weaknesses. Let's sort that out. So acknowledging it and working with it made a huge difference, because that meant I kind of saw what was happening and I could say, you know what? I need support here, or I'm really good at this piece, or I need the notes. Can I have the note? Can I have a printout of the... So that was actually probably the first time that I ended up with a printout of the notes, right? It was just the dawn of the new era where PowerPoint presentations were a thing, and I started getting the notes. Not everybody did in some classes, and everybody did in other classes, and it was amazing, because then the high points were there, and I added my thoughts, or doodles, or whatever else I needed, right? So I was suddenly able to make sure that I wasn't missing information. I didn't have those big old information gaps that made me have to churn twice as hard and work twice as hard to know what I was talking about. It was a revolution. And it allowed me to see myself as a complicated person with strengths and weaknesses. I wasn't really smart, like people say when they find out I have a PhD, but I also... maybe I wasn't as much of a failure as I thought I was. It changed the way I saw myself. I was a complicated mix, and I needed support, and I had some real amazing strengths. And then came my kids, and that was when things really changed for me in my perception of neurodiversity, because finding out about their issues, the stuff that was hanging them up, it totally changed my view of this from a deficit model to a strength-based model. And that is, I think, the major thing, right? This is not a deficit. This is not a weakness. This is a difference in how you think. It's a difference in how you process information. And the more research they do, the more they find that out. So they've seen, for example, in dyslexia, that there's difficulty processing things in the language center. So when you see words, they don't process through the language center the same way. But that means that the information bounces around to a couple different places in the brain. So it tends to cross the from my understanding, tends to cross the corpus callosum, go over here, come back over here, get processed, and then get shot forward. So it's hitting multiple regions of the brain rather than people who have much more language skills and reading skills, because it just goes on all on the same point in the brain, and it kind of bounces between regions that are near to each other. And so that's really causing you to think in a completely different way, which means some people are going to have strengths with the language stuff and with the reading, and other people are going to have strength conceptualizing. So, for example, many people with neurodiversity are able to take a big picture look at things, or they're able to see patterns in ways that other people can't. And that's a huge strength. And there's a lot more as they do research. Everything new that comes out convinces me that all of these things, this neurodiversity, it's not a bug in the system. This is a feature. Neurodiversity is a feature. We all have different brains because we need to have different roles in society. And now that we stick everybody at a desk and expect them to sit still for 8 hours and do worksheets, we want them all to think in the same way in the school system, right? We're churning out automatons. We're not churning out a variety of roles. We're not churning out people doing a lot of different things to maintain society. So it's been regarded up until now as a deficit model. The model that they had in the 80s when I was a kid was, okay, either you have success and you're fine, or you don't have success and then there's a problem and we address it, right? But that's not the model that we have anymore. So this is wild, but my daughter, she's ADHD, right? And she was really struggling in one of her years of school, and in particular struggling with one teacher in her classroom. And it was kind of bad vibes all around. She was coming home, she was melting down, she was just overwhelmed, she didn't feel comfortable there, she didn't understand what was going wrong, and we couldn't fix it. We kept going, we need to have a meeting, and here's her accommodations, or are her accommodations being met? And everything seemed to check out. When they went down the list, check, yep, everything's fine. But it was bad. It wasn't working. So we ended up getting an advocate who had a lot more experience, and she walked into the meeting and she explained to the teacher, this is the diagnosis, and here's some features. For example, physical dysregulation. Fidgets help because that gives an outlet for the dysregulation. And as long as it's maintained, that getting up, walking, that helps, right? And this is why. And then said, you know what else? Sarcasm is probably going to be lost on her because that's often a challenge. And so the teacher was using sarcasm, which, I mean, for that grade level, in that age group, that's kind of common, right? Sarcasm is a common language, so you use a little bit of the language and it kind of trips with that age group. But for her, she didn't necessarily understand that. And so she was confused and she didn't understand what was happening, and she would end up feeling really agitated about the whole thing. So the teacher, it finally clicked with the teacher and she stopped using the sarcasm. And within a week, my daughter, her whole mindset in that class had changed. She felt more comfortable in there. She thought that she and the teacher were doing well. She started succeeding better in the class over sarcasm, right? So it's not even, a lot of the accommodations are, extra time on tests and time to learn and a sheet of words or whatever. But this was an accommodation that was entirely about the social interaction. So the accommodations that are happening when you can put a diagnosis to a person can be things including social time, or I need time to decompress, or I need a certain amount of quiet, or I need a fidget. There are a lot of things that aren't necessarily academics. They're things that you can use in any part of your life, right? And that one, sarcasm, wouldn't have been in my top 20 for possible classroom issues. But knowing more about some of the features that were common to that diagnosis meant that I could take a stab at it and I could make a really big impact. And now she's doing really well. I mean, she still has some stuff, right? I mean, we all have challenges, and now we're into middle school. That's rough, though I think I might be more worried about it than she is. And she's doing well. And a lot of the accommodations have followed her, and she knows what works well. And she knows some of the accommodations we've done away with because we've discovered, you know what, they're not even necessary. And again, it's the sarcasm thing. It's not all autistic people. It's not all, it's not all people, right? And just like humans, people that are neurodiverse, if you've met one neurodiverse person, you've met one neurodiverse person. However, having an awareness of those common features means you can troubleshoot. Even when accommodations aren't really a thing, right? You're not in a job position or school, you're just in a social position, you can still troubleshoot. You can understand yourself better. You can troubleshoot how you keep your room. You can troubleshoot, you know what, morning's hard. It's hard to make transitions. So if I'm going to make transitions, I need to set an alarm. I now have about 15 alarms on my phone for the week because setting an alarm allows me 5 minutes to make that transition and I'm more effective. So essentially, that diagnosis, really what it does, it doesn't change you. It doesn't make you any different. It doesn't make you any better. It doesn't make you any worse. What it does really is it just helps you be a better you. It helps you figure out how to lock in on what's going to support you best. So if you're thinking about it, if you're curious about what the function would be, why would I bother with that? Is that going to be a downside? I would tell you, based on my diagnosis all those years ago and my kid's diagnosis now, no, it's not a downside. There is no downside to it. Basically, it's going to give you a better key to understand yourself. Your capabilities won't change. Who you are won't change. But you might find some keys to unlock doors you didn't think could open. And that's the benefit of diagnosis.